In the scorching deserts of ancient Egypt, where the sun blazed mercilessly and sandstorms could bury entire cities, there ruled a god whose very name struck fear into the hearts of mortals and deities alike. He was Seth, the god of chaos, storms, violence, and the desert. A deity so powerful and so dangerous that he murdered his own brother to seize the throne of Egypt, yet so essential that without him, the sun itself would cease to rise. This is the complete story of Seth, the red god of chaos, whose tale is one of murder, betrayal, divine warfare, and the eternal struggle between order and disorder in ancient Egyptian mythology. Seth, also known as Set, Setesh, or Sutek, was one of the oldest gods in the Egyptian pantheon, worshipped from the pre-dynastic period around 3500 BCE until the end of ancient Egyptian civilization. He was the son of the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut, making him part of the Ennead, the 9 great gods of Heliopolis. His siblings included Osiris, the god of the afterlife and fertility, Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, and Nephthys, the goddess of morning and the night. Seth would marry his sister Nephthys, as was common among Egyptian deities, though their relationship would prove complicated and ultimately tragic. Seth's appearance was as unusual and unsettling as his nature. He was typically depicted as a man with the head of an unknown animal, a creature that Egyptologists call the Seth animal or typhonic beast. This mysterious creature had a curved snout, tall rectangular ears, a forked tail and a canine-like body. No one knows exactly what animal this represented. Some scholars suggest it was an aardvark. Others propose a donkey, a jackal, an okapi, or even a purely mythological creature that never existed in nature. Whatever it was, the Seth animal was associated with the desert, with foreigners and with chaos. Seth's domain was the desert, the red land that surrounded the fertile black soil of the Nile Valley. While his brother Osiris represented the life-giving Nile, the fertile crops and the order of civilization, Seth represented everything wild, untamed, and dangerous. He was the god of storms, of drought, of the scorching desert winds that could kill travelers. He was associated with the color red, the color of the desert sand, of blood, of violence and chaos. He was loud, aggressive, sexually potent, and utterly without the restraint and order that characterized the other gods. Yet, despite his chaotic nature, Seth was not originally considered evil. In the earliest periods of Egyptian religion, Seth was a powerful protector deity. He was the god who defended Ra, the sun god, during his nightly journey through the underworld. Each night, Ra's solar bark would travel through the Duat, the realm of the dead, and there he would be attacked by Apophis, the great serpent of chaos who sought to devour the sun and plunge the world into eternal darkness. It was Seth, with his immense strength and his affinity for violence, who stood at the prow of Ra's boat and fought Apophis, spearing the serpent and driving it back so that the sun could rise again each morning. This role made Seth essential to the cosmic order. Without Seth's strength and willingness to engage in violence, the sun would not rise, and all life would end. The Egyptians understood that chaos in controlled amounts was necessary. Seth represented the violent power needed to fight against the greater chaos of Apophis. He was chaos fighting chaos, violence channeled for a necessary purpose. But Seth's story takes a dark turn with the myth that would define him for the rest of Egyptian history, the murder of Osiris. According to the myth, Osiris was the rightful king of Egypt, a wise and benevolent ruler who brought civilization, agriculture, and law to humanity. He taught the Egyptians how to farm, how to make bread and beer, how to worship the gods properly. Under Osiris's rule, Egypt prospered, and the people loved their king. Seth, however, was consumed with jealousy. Why should Osiris be king? Why should his brother receive all the glory and worship, while Seth was relegated to the barren desert? Seth's resentment grew into hatred, and hatred into a plot for murder. The exact details of the murder vary in different versions of the myth, but the most famous account comes from the Greek writer Plutarch, who recorded the Egyptian myths in his work On Isis and Osiris around 100 CE. According to Plutarch's version, Seth secretly measured Osiris's body and had a beautiful chest constructed to those exact dimensions. He then threw a great feast and announced that he would give this magnificent chest as a gift to whoever could fit inside it perfectly. One by one, the guests tried to fit into the chest, but none matched its dimensions. Finally, Osiris tried, and of course, he fit perfectly. The moment Osiris lay down inside the chest, Seth and his 72 conspirators slammed the lid shut, nailed it closed, and sealed it with molten lead. They then threw the chest into the Nile, where it floated downstream and eventually out to sea. Isis, Osiris's wife and sister, was devastated. She searched throughout Egypt and beyond for her husband's body, eventually finding the chest lodged in a tamarisk tree in Byblos, in what is now Lebanon. She brought Osiris's body back to Egypt and hid it in the marshes while she prepared the proper burial rites. But Seth discovered where she had hidden the body. In a rage, he found Osiris's corpse, tore it into 14 pieces, and scattered them throughout Egypt, ensuring that Osiris could never be properly buried or resurrected. But Isis was not defeated. With the help of her sister Nephthys, Seth's own wife, who had abandoned him in horror at his crime, and the jackal-headed god Anubis, Isis searched throughout Egypt and recovered all the pieces of Osiris's body except one, his phallus, which had been eaten by a fish. Isis used her powerful magic to reassemble Osiris and create a golden phallus to replace the missing piece. Through her magic and the embalming skills of Anubis, Osiris was transformed into the first mummy, preserved for eternity. Though Osiris could not return to life in the mortal world, Isis used her magic to briefly reanimate him long enough to conceive a child, Horus, who would grow up to avenge his father and reclaim the throne of Egypt. Osiris descended to the underworld to become the Lord of the Dead, the judge who would weigh the hearts of the deceased against the feather of Ma'at to determine their fate in the afterlife. Meanwhile, Seth had claimed the throne of Egypt for himself. He ruled as a tyrant, and Egypt suffered under his chaotic reign. But Isis hid her son Horus in the marshes of the Nile Delta, protecting him with magic and raising him in secret. When Horus came of age, he challenged Seth for the throne, claiming it as his birthright as the son of Osiris. What followed was a series of contests and battles between Horus and Seth that would last for 80 years. The conflict between these two gods became the central mythological drama of ancient Egypt, representing the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between legitimate rule and usurpation, between the fertile Nile Valley and the barren desert. The contests between Horus and Seth were both physical battles and tests of cunning. In one famous episode, they transformed into hippopotamuses and fought underwater for 3 months. In another, they raced in boats made of stone. Seth's boat, being actually made of stone, immediately sank, while Horus had cleverly made his boat of wood painted to look like stone. The contests often had sexual undertones, reflecting ancient Egyptian ideas about dominance and submission. In one disturbing episode, Seth attempted to rape Horus to establish dominance, but Horus caught Seth's semen in his hand and threw it into the river. Horus then masturbated onto lettuce that Seth ate, and when the gods called forth the semen to determine who had dominated whom, Horus's semen answered from inside Seth, humiliating him. The gods of the Ennead gathered to judge between Horus and Seth. Most of the gods favored Horus, recognizing his legitimate claim as Osiris's son. But Ra, the sun god, favored Seth, appreciating his strength and his role in defending the solar bark. The debate went on for years, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Finally, the gods consulted Osiris himself in the underworld. Osiris sent a message declaring that Horus was the rightful king, and threatening that if the gods did not install Horus on the throne, he would send the demons of the underworld to drag the gods down to the land of the dead. Faced with this threat, the gods ruled in favor of Horus. Horus became the king of Egypt, the god of kingship and the sky, and every pharaoh was considered to be the living embodiment of Horus. Seth was defeated but not destroyed. In some versions of the myth, he was exiled to the desert, forever banned from the fertile lands of Egypt. In others, he was forced to serve Ra, continuing his role as the defender of the solar bark. In still other versions, Horus and Seth were reconciled, with Seth acknowledging Horus as king while retaining his own power over the desert and storms. This ambiguous ending reflects the complex Egyptian attitude toward Seth. He was a murderer and a usurper, Yet he was also necessary. The desert was dangerous, but it also protected Egypt from invaders. Storms were destructive, but they also brought change. Violence was terrible, but sometimes violence was needed to fight greater threats. Seth embodied all of these contradictions. Seth's reputation changed dramatically over the course of Egyptian history. During the Second Intermediate Period, when foreign rulers called the Hyksos controlled parts of Egypt, Seth was associated with these foreigners and their storm god. The 19th dynasty pharaohs, including the famous Ramesses II, came from a region where Seth was the primary deity, and they promoted Seth worship throughout Egypt. Ramesses II even named his daughter Bint Anath, meaning daughter of Anath, after Seth's foreign consort. But during the first millennium BCE, as Egypt faced increasing foreign invasions and internal strife, Seth's reputation darkened. He became increasingly associated with evil, with foreign enemies and with chaos in its most destructive form. By the Greco-Roman period, Seth had been thoroughly demonized, identified with the Greek monster Typhon, and considered the Egyptian equivalent of Satan. His images were defaced, his name was chiseled out of inscriptions, and his worship was suppressed. Yet even in this late period, some Egyptians continued to worship Seth, recognizing that chaos and disorder, while dangerous, were part of the natural order. Desert travelers prayed to Seth for protection. Soldiers invoked his strength in battle. Those who felt like outsiders or rebels identified with the red god of the desert. Seth's mythology influenced later religious traditions. Some scholars see parallels between Seth and the biblical figure of Satan. Both are associated with the color red, with the desert, with rebellion against divine authority, and with the corruption of humanity. The demonization of Seth in later Egyptian religion may have influenced early Jewish and Christian concepts of the devil. In modern times, Seth has experienced something of a rehabilitation. Scholars recognize that the ancient Egyptians had a more nuanced view of Seth than simply as an evil god. He represented necessary chaos, the wild forces of nature that could not be tamed but had to be acknowledged and respected. Some modern pagan and occult traditions have embraced Seth as a deity of strength, independence, and the rejection of unjust authority. The story of Seth ultimately teaches us that chaos and order are not absolute opposites but exist in a necessary balance. Seth murdered Osiris and usurped the throne, yet he also defended Ra and made the sunrise possible. He was violent and destructive, yet his strength was essential. He represented the desert that threatened Egypt, yet also the desert that protected Egypt from invaders. He was the storm that destroyed crops, yet also the storm that brought change and cleared away the old to make room for the new. In ancient Egyptian thought, the universe was maintained by Ma'at, the principle of order, truth, and justice. But Ma'at could only exist in contrast to Isfet, chaos and disorder. Seth was the embodiment of Isfet, yet without him, Ma'at would have no meaning. The Egyptians understood that you cannot have order without chaos, light without darkness, life without death. Seth, the red god of the desert, the murderer of Osiris, the eternal enemy of Horus, was as necessary to the cosmos as any of the benevolent gods. Today, whether we see Seth as a villain, a tragic figure, or a necessary force of nature, his story remains one of the most compelling in all of mythology, a reminder that the world is not divided simply into good and evil, but contains shades of grey, and that sometimes the most dangerous and chaotic forces are also the most essential to our survival.